Do you believe in miracles? I'm not talking about coincidences or luck. I'm talking about something that seems humanly impossible. Imagine watching your 6-year-old daughter on the brink of death, with only a 10% chance of survival. Now imagine that, against all odds, she survives with no lasting damage. Sounds unbelievable, right? But what happened to Grace wasn't luck. It was a true miracle, powered by unshakable faith and love. Want to know how this was even possible? Stay with me, because this story will change the way you see life and the challenges you face. It was one of those quiet days that seemed to pass unnoticed in the routine of a simple family. The house was filled with laughter and movement. 6-year-old Grace ran around, full of energy and joy, the way only a child can be. It was impossible not to smile watching her twirl around the living room in her favorite dress, while her mother, busy with daily chores, took a moment to admire that little miracle of life. But something felt off. Grace, usually so full of energy, started slowing down. As the sun began to set, her mother noticed she was quieter than usual, her cheeks flushed and her eyes watery. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked, placing her hand on her daughter's forehead and immediately feeling the heat. "I'm just tired, Mommy. I want to lie down for a bit," Grace answered, her little voice already carrying traces of exhaustion. Her mother gently laid her down on the couch and stayed close, watching her carefully. Fevers weren't uncommon at her age. After all, how many times had she caught a cold before? But that night, something inside the mother's heart felt different. This wasn't just any fever. There was something more, something she couldn't quite put into words. As the night deepened, Grace's condition worsened. The fever spiked unpredictably, coming and going without warning. Her breathing grew heavier, more labored. Any hope of sleep vanished for her mother. Instead, she spent the night keeping watch, listening for every breath, every movement. And each time Grace called out to her, her voice grew weaker, yet still filled with trust. "Mommy, help me. I'm right here, my love. I won't leave your side," her mother whispered, holding onto her daughter's small, burning hand. In the days that followed, Grace's symptoms persisted. The worry in her mother's heart only grew stronger. She took her daughter to the doctor, seeking answers. But each time, the response was the same. "It's just a common flu, Mom. Nothing to worry about." The doctors reassured her time and time again. But she couldn't accept that. Something wasn't right. Deep inside, an unshakable instinct told her, "Keep pushing. Don't stop. Don't give up." Despite the frustration, despite the doubts creeping into her mind, she refused to let fear take over. Her faith held her together. She prayed in silence, asking God for wisdom and strength. At that moment, she had no idea how deep this battle would go. She couldn't yet see the road ahead. But one thing was clear. Her heart was already preparing for the fight of a lifetime. Because sometimes the greatest test of faith begins in the simplest moments. A quiet night, a mother watching over her child, and an unshakable love that refuses to let go. The next few days were a whirlwind of worry and frustration. Grace, who used to run around the house full of energy, now barely had the strength to get out of bed. Her mother, driven by that unshakable instinct only a mother has, refused to rest. She took Grace from doctor to doctor, desperately searching for answers. At the third appointment, she sat in yet another waiting room, cradling her daughter in her arms. Grace, pale and weak, rested her head on her mother's shoulder, seeking comfort. As they waited, the mother looked at her daughter's frail face, a storm of thoughts running through her mind. "Why isn't anyone seeing what I'm feeling?" Finally, they were called in. With her voice tight from worry, the mother explained everything in detail. "Doctor, she's had a high fever for days. This isn't just the flu, I know it. Her breathing is different, heavier." The doctor, calm and professional, examined Grace carefully before giving his opinion. "Mom, I understand your concern, but her lungs sound clear. There's no sign of congestion. I don't see a need for an X-ray." His words hit like a bucket of cold water. But the mother refused to accept it. A force stronger than fear pushed her forward. "Doctor, I insist. Please do the X-ray. I take full responsibility." The doctor let out a long sigh before giving in. "All right, if that's what you want, we'll do it." Hours later, the results came in. The doctor's expression had completely changed. He looked at the mother, stunned. "Mom, this is far worse than we thought. One of her lungs is completely taken over by pneumonia. The other one is already 70% compromised. She needs to be admitted to the ICU immediately. The words hit her like a blow to the chest. She gripped Grace's tiny hand tighter, trying to process what was happening. Looking down at her daughter, so small, so fragile, she felt tears sting her eyes. But in the midst of that crushing fear, a fire ignited inside her. "I will fight for you, my daughter. God is with us." The trip to the hospital was a blur of emotions. Holding Grace tightly in her arms, the mother whispered silent prayers while gently stroking her daughter's hair. When they arrived, the medical team was already waiting. But then came the news that shattered her. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but hospital policy doesn't allow parents in the ICU. Only medical staff can be inside." Her heart dropped. Grace, her voice barely more than a whisper, looked up at her mother with pleading eyes. "Mommy, are you going home? Will you be able to sleep?" The mother knelt beside the hospital bed, cupping her daughter's pale face in her hands. "No, my love. I'm not going home. I will stay right outside this hospital, right by the entrance. You'll know I'm here, praying and cheering for you." Grace, despite her exhaustion, gave a faint smile. "Then I will fight, Mommy, because I know you'll be there." The mother watched as they wheeled her daughter away, feeling an unbearable weight settle over her chest. But there was no time for despair. Outside, on the cold hospital steps, she made a silent vow. "I will not leave this place until I walk out of here with my daughter by my side." The hospital entrance had become Grace's mother's second home. There, on the cold concrete steps, she took her place, night after night, holding her silent vigil. Each night was a test of faith, and each morning, a renewal of hope. What seemed impossible to others was the bare minimum she could do for her daughter. The first few days were the hardest. Every morning, as the nurses left the ICU, they brought updates on Grace. "Mom, she asks for you all night. She barely sleeps, constantly wondering if you're still outside." And she was. Always. No matter how cold it got, no matter how uncomfortable the steps were. Wrapped in a thin blanket, her hands clasped in silent prayer, she faced the weight of every long night. Passers-by noticed her exhaustion, but more than that, they saw the unwavering determination in her eyes. Some stopped to offer food, others just a kind word. "You're so strong," they told her. "It's not strength," she answered, offering a tired but faith-filled smile. "It's love." Her daily routine never changed. At exactly 10 a.m., she was allowed inside the ICU to see Grace. Those were the most anticipated moments of her day. Every time she walked in, her heart pounded, both with fear and with hope. Most of the time, when she saw Grace, the little girl was asleep. She knew why. Grace had spent the entire night awake, worried about whether her mother was still outside. One day, a nurse gently touched her arm and said, "She only sleeps after we tell her you're here." Knowing you're close calms her down, so the mother did what she had always done. She sat by her daughter's bedside, watching her sleep. Even in her frail state, Grace carried a quiet strength. Her mother held her small hand and, without needing words, prayed in silence, asking God to restore her child. One morning, a nurse approached with an update that made the mother's heart sink. "Grace needs a procedure to drain fluid from her lung. There's no other option. But because of her fragile condition, we can't use general anesthesia, only local. It will be very uncomfortable." The doctor then made a suggestion that shattered the mother's heart. "We may have to restrain her, so she doesn't move during the procedure." Immediately, the mother shook her head. "That won't be necessary. Let me be with her. I'll hold her hand. We'll get through this together." The doctor hesitated but finally agreed. When the moment came, the mother knelt beside Grace's bed, gently brushing her daughter's hair back. "Sweetheart, this is going to hurt a little, but it's something we need to do so you can get better. I'll be right here the whole time, holding your hand. We'll go through this together." Grace looked up at her, her exhausted little body barely able to respond. "Promise you won't let go?" "I promise, my love." The procedure began. Tears ran down Grace's cheeks, but she didn't flinch. She didn't move an inch. Her tiny fingers clung to her mother's hand with all the strength she had left. It was as if that touch, that connection, was the only thing keeping her steady. When it was over, the doctor let out a breath, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've never seen a child endure something like this with such strength. She's incredible." The mother, her own eyes brimming with tears, gave a grateful smile. It's not just her strength. It's God's grace carrying us through. Every day in the ICU was a test of perseverance. Every night on those cold hospital steps was a test of faith. But the mother refused to leave. For Grace, just knowing her mother was outside was more powerful than any medicine. And so, day after day, night after night, love and faith held them both together. The miracle hadn't come yet, but the mother knew, even when God seems silent, He is still working. The days in the ICU felt endless. Every update from the doctors was a mix of hope and uncertainty. Grace's condition fluctuated between small improvements and critical moments. But through it all, one thing remained constant: the invisible strength shared between mother and daughter. Then came the moment that would test that strength in an unimaginable way. The doctor approached the mother with a serious expression. "We need to drain her other lung," he explained. "Her condition is critical, but we can't use general anesthesia again. Only local. We're worried about how she'll handle the pain." The weight of his words was heavy, but the mother didn't hesitate. She knew that her presence was the key to keeping her daughter strong. "Doctor, let me be with her. I'll explain everything, and I promise she'll stay calm." The doctor hesitated, clearly skeptical. "Mom, even very disciplined children can react badly to pain. But if you believe in this, we'll do as you ask." The mother stepped into the ICU room, where Grace lay in bed, her tiny frame exhausted. Even in her weakened state, she could see the worry on her mother's face. "Mommy, what's going to happen now?" she asked in a barely audible whisper. Her mother sat beside her, taking her small hand in both of hers, holding on tight. "Sweetheart, the doctors need to do a procedure to help you breathe better. It's going to hurt a little, but I'll be right here the whole time. I'll hold your hand, and together, we'll get through this." Grace locked eyes with her mother, searching for reassurance. "You promise you won't let go?" "I promise, my love." As the procedure began, the room fell into silence. Grace closed her eyes, gripping her mother's hand with all the strength she had left. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't move, not even an inch. Her mother leaned in close, whispering words of encouragement. "You are so brave, my love. God is here with us. He is giving you strength right now." Minutes felt like hours, but at last, the procedure was over. The doctor let out a deep breath, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this. Your daughter endured all of that with an unbelievable strength. This is not normal." The mother, wiping her own tears, smiled. "It's because she knows she's not alone. God is with us." That night, sitting on the hospital steps once again, the mother reflected on just how much this battle had demanded from her daughter. Grace's strength was something beyond the physical. It was a faith that transcended pain. The nurses, now familiar with the mother's unwavering presence, shared little stories about Grace's nights. Every night she asks, "Is my mom still there?" And the moment we tell her yes, she relaxes, as if just knowing you're outside is enough to give her strength. The bond between them was an anchor in the middle of the storm. Every touch, every look, every whispered word of encouragement was a reminder that they would face anything together. Despite the exhaustion, the mother knew there was still a long road ahead. But at that moment, she had seen something undeniable, a living testament that faith, love, and compassion could turn suffering into strength. The days dragged on, and Grace's battle felt endless. Her mother, faithful to her promise, remained steadfast at the hospital entrance day after day. Her faith continued to be her greatest source of strength, even when the news was discouraging. But then, one particular night tested the bond between mother and daughter like never before. That evening, just like every other night, the mother prepared to say goodbye to Grace at 10 p.m., the hospital's strict rule. Parents had to leave the ICU so the children could rest. But that night, something in Grace's eyes was different. It was as if she knew this night would be crucial. "Mommy, you have to stay with me," Grace pleaded, her tired eyes full of desperation. Her mother's heart clenched. She knew she couldn't stay inside the ICU overnight, but how could she ignore her daughter's request? "My love, if I could, I would stay. But the nurses won't allow it." Grace looked around the room, scanning for a solution. Then, her eyes landed on a small closet in the corner. "Mommy, look, that closet. If you hide inside, no one will see you. Then you can stay with me." The idea, so simple yet so unexpected, made her mother hesitate for a moment. But when she saw the look in Grace's eyes, filled with fear and longing, she made up her mind. "All right, my love. I'll stay with you." She carefully squeezed herself inside the tiny closet, bending uncomfortably, barely able to move. It was cramped, stuffy, and painful. But none of that mattered. As soon as she closed the door, she heard Grace's soft, relieved voice. "See, Mommy? It worked. Now I can sleep knowing you're here." The night was long. From inside the closet, the mother would crack the door open just slightly whenever she was sure no one was around. She'd make small gestures and silly faces at Grace, whispering playful words of encouragement. Even in her weakened state, Grace smiled. Those small interactions seemed to be enough to renew her strength. The hours crawled by. The mother's body ached from the awkward position, but her heart was at peace. She knew she was exactly where she needed to be, right beside her daughter. As Grace finally drifted into restful sleep, her mother quietly whispered prayers, asking God to heal and restore her little warrior. At 10 a.m., when parents were allowed back into the ICU, the mother slipped out of the closet discreetly, stretching her sore limbs as if she had just arrived for the morning visit. The nurses greeted her with warm smiles, completely unaware of the night she had just endured. Grace's face lit up when she saw her. "Mommy, thank you for staying with me. You gave me the strength to get through the night." Her mother squeezed her daughter's hand, her own eyes brimming with tears. "Always, my love. I will always be by your side, wherever you need me." As the morning sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, the mother realized something powerful. A mother's love knows no limits, not even hospital rules. And once again, her faith was strengthened. God was with them, even in the most unexpected moments. Days turned into weeks, and Grace's battle continued. Every new update from the doctors brought a mixture of hope and fear, but her mother's faith never wavered. Then, the most critical moment of all arrived, a medical decision that would determine Grace's fate. The doctor called the parents in for a serious conversation. His expression was grave, almost somber. "Mom, Dad, we need to perform emergency surgery. We will open Grace's chest to clean her lungs. We'll remove the damaged tissue and see how much remains for her to breathe. When we're done, we will extubate her. She will have to breathe on her own with whatever lung capacity is left." A chill ran down the mother's spine, but she managed to ask in a steady voice, "And if she can't breathe?" The doctor exhaled slowly before answering. "If that happens, we'll have to intubate her again. But if she comes out of this surgery still intubated, unfortunately, she won't survive." Those words were devastating, but the mother knew she couldn't show despair. Grace needed her to be strong. Holding back her emotions, she asked, "Doctor, what are my daughter's chances of survival?" The doctor hesitated, then finally admitted, "Only 10%, but it's the only chance we have." The mother turned to look at Grace, lying so small and fragile in the hospital bed. The little girl slowly raised her thin arm and reached for her mother's hand. "Mommy, am I going to die?" Grace's voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes filled with fear. Her mother knelt beside the bed, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. But instead of fear, her voice carried an unshakable faith. "No, my love, because God is with us." There's a verse in the Bible, Matthew 18 verses 19 to 20, that says, "If two of you agree here on earth concerning anything you ask, my Father in heaven will do it for you. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, I am there with them." Even in her weakened state, Grace raised her frail little arm and, with quiet determination, declared, "Mommy, now we are 2. I believe too. God will do the miracle." Those words resonated in her mother's heart like a divine promise. As the doctors prepared Grace for surgery, her mother stayed behind, praying relentlessly. The hospital hallway became her altar, her whispered prayers filled with desperation and trust. The surgery lasted more than 2 hours. The mother never stopped praying. She pictured Grace breathing again, smiling, living. When time felt like it had completely stopped, the doors to the operating room finally opened. The doctor stepped out, still wearing his surgical cap and mask. His hands trembled slightly, and tears streamed down his face. He removed his glasses and looked at the mother, his expression a mixture of shock and awe. "Mom, I have to tell you something. For the first time in my career, I witnessed something that truly challenged me. When we finished the surgery, it was time to extubate her. I began the countdown. 1, 2, But before I could even say 3, your daughter took the deepest, strongest breath with what little lung capacity she had left. It was like witnessing a spectacular fight for life. The mother, now crying as well, clasped her hands together in gratitude. First to the doctor, and then, most importantly, to God. When Grace was wheeled back to her room, she was breathing on her own. She was still weak, but her expression was that of a victor. As soon as she saw her mother, she whispered, "I knew God was with me, Mommy." The mother held her daughter's hand tightly and responded, tears in her eyes. "And He will never leave us, my love. You are a miracle." In that moment, the mother realized something profound. It wasn't just Grace's breath that had been restored. Their family's faith had been renewed in a way that would change them forever. The days after the surgery brought a completely different atmosphere to the hospital. Grace, who had spent so long in a critical state, was finally showing signs of recovery. The air felt lighter, conversations were filled with more hope, and for the first time in weeks, her mother felt her heart rest, even if just a little. Inside her hospital room, Grace lay in bed, but something had changed. There was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there for a long time. When her mother walked in, Grace smiled and in a still fragile voice said, "Mommy, I can breathe without struggling." Her mother couldn't hold back the tears. But this time they weren't from fear or sorrow. They were tears of pure gratitude. "My love, you are a warrior. God heard our prayers." Grace's recovery amazed even the doctors. Each day she grew stronger. Slowly, she started sitting up again, eating on her own, and eventually walking around the room with help. Her mother never left her side, celebrating every tiny step forward. "One step at a time, my love. We're getting there." The nurses and doctors who had followed Grace's entire journey were deeply moved. "Mom, I've worked here for years, and stories like this remind me why I chose this profession," one nurse admitted. "The strength you both have is truly inspiring." And then, 1 week later, the moment they had prayed for arrived. Grace was discharged. It was a moment filled with emotions, joy, and gratitude. As she walked out of the hospital, holding her mother's hand, she looked up at the sky and smiled. "Mommy, remember when I told you God would do a miracle? I was right." Her mother gazed at her daughter, now full of life, and nodded. "Yes, my love, and He did even more than we imagined. God never does things halfway." When they arrived home, Grace was welcomed with overwhelming joy. Family members who had spent days and nights in prayer hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by gratitude. Her father, who had often felt helpless during the hardest moments, now held his daughter in his arms as if he never wanted to let go. "You are the greatest gift God has ever given me, my daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The days that followed were filled with peace, but also purpose. With her health fully restored, Grace began enjoying life's little pleasures again. Playing in the backyard, reading books with her mom, sharing laughter with her dad. Every breath she took was a reminder of the miracle they had witnessed. But Grace's healing wasn't just physical. Her story deeply touched everyone who heard it. Friends, relatives, and even strangers who learned about her journey found themselves looking at life with renewed hope. One evening, as Grace and her mother sat together on the couch, the little girl asked a question that left her mother speechless for a moment. "Mommy, why did God choose to save me?" Her mother looked deep into her daughter's eyes and answered with certainty. "Because He has a purpose for you, my love. Your story will inspire others to never give up. You are living proof that faith, perseverance, and love can transform any situation." That night felt different. The sky seemed fuller of stars, the air felt lighter, charged with gratitude and divine grace. Their journey had been painful, but they knew one thing for certain: the victory was complete. Years passed, and Grace became a living testimony of God's power. The fragile little girl who once struggled to breathe had grown into a young woman full of life, with a light in her eyes that brightened every place she entered. This past January, she celebrated her 18th birthday, her smile carrying the strength of everything she had been through. That night, friends and family gathered, not just to celebrate her milestone birthday, but to remember the miracle that had changed their lives forever. During dinner, as laughter and stories filled the room, Grace stood up, her voice slightly hesitant but her determination unwavering, just like when she was a child. "I know that many of you prayed for me when I was just a little girl. And today, looking around at all of you, all I feel is gratitude. Gratitude to God, who never gave up on me, and to each of you, who believed in a miracle even when everything seemed impossible. The room fell silent. Everyone was listening. It was as if Grace, standing there, was larger than life itself. For a long time, I asked myself, why did God choose to save me? But now I think I know the answer. He wanted my story to be a light for those who are facing darkness. Her mother, holding onto her father's hand, wiped away tears as they watched their daughter speak. And that's what I want to say to all of you. Never give up, even when everything seems lost. God never abandons us. He not only restores but makes everything new. And when He performs a miracle, it is complete. As soon as she finished speaking, the room erupted in a collective embrace. People surrounded her, each one expressing just how deeply her story had touched their lives. Some even admitted that her journey had renewed their faith, giving them the strength to persevere through their own battles. In the weeks that followed, Grace's family began sharing her testimony even more, touching the hearts of everyone who heard it. Hope spread like wildfire. But for Grace, just telling her story wasn't enough. Now, she wanted to take action. She started getting involved in social work, helping families going through hard times, especially those with children in hospitals. One day, during a visit to a children's hospital, she came across a little girl who reminded her of herself at 6 years old. The child, lying in bed, held her mother's hand, her eyes filled with fear. Grace sat down beside her, gently taking the girl's other hand. "You know, when I was your age, I was in the hospital too. I was scared just like you. But do you know what helped me get through it? I never lost hope. And God was with me the whole time." The little girl's mother, visibly moved, looked at Grace and asked, "You're Grace from the miracle story, aren't you?" Grace smiled warmly. "Yes, that's me. And if God did this for me, He can do it for your daughter too." The impact of that moment was profound. Right then, Grace understood. Her life had a greater purpose. Her story wasn't just about survival. It was about compassion, faith, and the unshakable truth that God always has a plan, even in the darkest moments. Today, Grace's lungs function perfectly. No scars, no complications. And when she looks back on her journey, there isn't a single trace of bitterness, only gratitude. Her life is proof that God doesn't just restore what is broken. He transforms the greatest struggles into stories of hope and victory. And so, Grace and her family move forward, inspiring everyone around them. Because in the end, the message is clear. No matter how difficult the journey, faith can move mountains, and God's love can perform miracles completely. Now tell me, what would you do if you were in Grace's mother's place? Do you think you'd have the courage and faith to fight until the very end? Maybe you're going through a tough situation right now. What's holding you back from believing that your life can change too? Why not start today by seeing your challenges as opportunities to grow and trust God more? If this story touched your heart, I want to challenge you. Share in the comments what you learned from it and how you plan to apply it to your life. I'd love to hear how you're going to transform the challenges you're facing into a victory. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, you'll find more inspiring stories to renew your faith, encourage you, and remind you that miracles still happen. Are you ready to join us on this journey of hope and purpose? See you in the next video.